Well, good evening and welcome to Insider Secrets to Supercharge Your CV, presented by me, Simon Gray. Thank you for joining me on a Monday evening at 8 o'clock. It's much appreciated. And in this particular session, what I'm going to look to do is to give you a unique insight into how to make the best possible use of your CV and to put together the most powerful CV you possibly can. And in a competitive job market, albeit we are in a recovery, if you believe the news, then it's really, really important that what you put down on paper gets you the head start ahead of your competition and leads to an interview, first interview, second interview, and ultimately a job offer. So before we get going, let's just make sure people can see and hear me. GoToWebinar is a very reliable platform. I use it on a fairly regular basis, but from time to time, there can be connectivity issues. So if for whatever reason I drop off or you drop off the line, please don't panic, just log back in and I'll do likewise. There is a question box on your control panel, just to make sure that you can hear me and see my presentation. If you could just type a big yes in there if you can. If you can't hear me, you won't hear me to type no, but just type in there if you would, please. Just give people a couple of minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. All righty. Good. I'm happy to take questions throughout the presentation. I'm planning that probably 10 minutes prior to the end, or 10 minutes to the end of the hour, we'll have a good time for Q&A. And of course, you can email me afterwards if you forget to ask me anything live tonight. Just a bit of background as to why I'm on the line and why I started this business, Career Codex, and why it is I do what I do. I trained as a chartered accountant with KPMG in Nottingham and qualified back in 2000. Didn't really want to be an accountant and went to see a recruitment company. And I was looking for a job in industry, but they saw something in me and persuaded me to take a job in the recruitment industry. So I started out doing recruitment, candidate calling, and over a 10-year period, built up a wealth of knowledge as to what it's like to sit between employer and job seeker and all the things that go on in between the transaction of finding a job, which involves a candidate accepting a job and going through a process, an employer coming to market with an opportunity and ultimately hiring. The past 5 years, or the last 5 years, I should say, in that 10-year period, was running my own recruitment company, which I started back in 2008. And what I started to realize running my own recruitment company was that actually the best way to help job seekers was not to find them a job myself, but actually to empower them to find a job themselves. And this came from interviewing a lot of the senior candidates in the market that, find it quite difficult because there just weren't the volume of jobs out there. And I decided, having had a conversation over and over again, conveying similar messages, to write a book called Super Secrets of the Successful Job Seeker, which has done fairly well on Amazon. It has, I think, now 49 5-star reviews, and brought me a lot of inquiries about the information I know, the insider secrets that I know about how to move successfully in the job market. And I did a program for BBC One, for BBC One Inside Out in East Midlands Today, which was about the over 55s moving in the job market and how difficult it had become. And that was really the platform that got me to write this book, because it's not an easy thing to write a book. And trust me, you don't write it for money, you write it for love. And started to get lots of inquiries through this. Off the back of that, I became an advisor on the Guardian Careers panel of experts. And was approached by an organization called AIM Awards to create 2 qualifications for job seekers using technology in job search. And off the back of this, I decided to leave my recruitment company and take the brave decision to found my own employability and training company called Career Codex, which is why I'm on the call tonight. So what is Career Codex before we get into CVs? Well, first of all, it's not the top 10 things you need to know to move successfully in the job market. It's not the top 10 things to say at interview or not to say. What it is built on real life experience, and it's definitely not textbook theory. So you see the 4 things on the screen, or the 4 rectangles on the screen. This is the Career Codex methodology, which is all about understanding your environment. Who are the players? What are their motivations? And what does that mean for you? Psychology, which is the psychology of the players in the job market, but also your own psychology and what that means in terms of how you believe, how you think, and ultimately how you act. Because what I have found over the years doing this thing is that quite often the biggest blocker for somebody finding a job is actually themselves, and a job seeker's worst enemy is often themselves. Planning, which is about bringing a plan to the job market of consistent and diligent activity, and then process, which is some of the things we're going to talk about tonight surrounding CVs. What I found when looking in the careers education market is that most people out there focus more on the process. So it's interview technique, it's interview skills preparation, it's CVs, it's all of this stuff that you come to associate with moving successfully in the job market. But actually, prior to that, there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be put right. And I guess the analogy I can use is when you build a house, you build it on solid foundations. And the solid foundations in the Career Codex methodology are environment psychology. And the planning is how you build the house. And the process is the bricks and mortar that you use to put the house together. And it's quite unusual for me to do a webinar or online workshop on CVs, but I've been asked to do this time and time again. Because for me, the most important thing about job seeker success is the psychology and understanding the environment. But don't get me wrong, that CVs are really, really important as part of your job search and is usually the first impression that you'll create either with a recruiter or with a potential employer. So what makes a good CV? So perhaps if you could type in the box what you think makes a good CV, a couple of words or a couple of thoughts, that would be really helpful. Any ideas? Okay, so John's put clear and concise documents. Yeah, absolutely. It shouldn't waffle. Samantha, yeah, a record of your work experience. Yeah, okay. Graham, clear message of candidate. Yeah, all good stuff. So as I said, a CV is an important document. But what I've found is that many job seekers that I've worked with spend far too much time writing, assessing, then rewriting their CV in the hope that each amend they make will get them closer to the job they want. And actually in the lead up to this webinar, I explain why this is perhaps not the best question, because this is a mistake really, because sometimes job seekers can become so paralyzed on what might be the perfect CV that they actually take no action. So one of the things I am keen to get across to you this evening is that there is no such thing as a perfect CV, because much depends on the reader and what they're looking for. And as you'll know, and as we'll come on to, when people read a CV, they generally don't read it. They scan read it. There's too many CVs to read. So spending so much time on your CV as if it were the holy grail of finding success in the job market is a mistake. You need a good CV, and you need to spend enough time on your CV to make it good enough. But then it's all about what you do with your CV and how you engage with recruiters, how you speak with them, how you talk to them, how you convince them that you're the person that they should be dealing with and representing. And in a similar vein with employers going direct to market. It's all about balance. Spend enough time on your CV so that it's good, but don't spend so much time on your CV that you do nothing with it. There is no such thing as a perfect CV. And if you fall into this trap, you'll take no action at all. And also, just to caveat some of the stuff that I'll say tonight, what I'm going to communicate to you about putting a CV together this evening is based on my personal experience, sitting between candidate and employer, and the feedback I've had from both. So there are things that I might say tonight that you think, well, do you know what? I don't agree with that. I think you need that on the CV, or I think you should do that in a slightly different way because somebody else has told you. That's absolutely fine. It's all down to a matter of opinion. There is no book that's written that says this is how you have to write your CV. What I'll give you this evening is my advice based on my experience as to how to make your CV stand out from the crowd as best you can. Before we get into that, let's talk about some key principles of CVs. Now, I mentioned the word Holy Grail and that the CV will find you a job. Only in certain sectors do you tend to get hired on the basis of your CV, and it tends to be where technical skills are really, really important. So probably a prime example of that is the IT industry, where I've seen people hired on the basis of a CV, and sometimes without even a face-to-face meeting. But generally, as a prelude to being offered a job, you need a face-to-face meeting in the form of an interview. So the purpose of a CV is not to get you a job. The purpose of a CV is to create enough interest in your skills and experience to get you invited in for interview. That's it. It's to get you an interview, to get you in front of a recruiter or employer. It's not your life history, and it's definitely not every bit of experience you've ever had. It's a carefully crafted document that conveys key messages about you, what you stand for, and what you bring to the party. If you think about it, when you go and watch a movie at the weekend, you tend not to watch the movie and then decide if you want to watch it. What you probably do, if you're doing your research, is you watch a trailer to see whether the movie looks appealing, and then you'll go and watch it. Or similarly, when you go on holiday, you tend not to read the book to then decide if you're going to read it. You'll read the back of the book, which is a summary or a snapshot as to the key points and the key things that book will talk about. And it's exactly the same with your CV. So it's a highlights memorandum, if you like, about what you bring to bear in the job market that will appeal to recruiters and employers. So I've been a professional recruiter for 10 years or so. So how do we read CVs, and how do employers read CVs? Well, in truth, we don't read them because we have too many. And we tend to read CVs in two waves. So we get the pile of CVs on the desk or on the email inbox, and we go through them very, very quickly. And based on our job specification or what it is we feel we need for the job, we put the CVs into three piles: the yes pile, the maybe pile, or the no pile. So the yes pile is, looks interesting. I'll read a little bit more about this later, and I'll probably invite this person in for interview. The no pile is, well, next up, I'm afraid, is the shredder or the bin, whichever's closer. And the maybe pile, in reality, is the second no pile, which also ends up in the shredder or the bin, but just takes a little bit of time. And the analogy I'd give you here is that when we get post at home, sometimes something lands on the doorstep and we think, it looks quite interesting. I'll get back to that. And we put it on a table somewhere in our office or in the kitchen. And what happens is we forget to look at it. And over time, that ends up in the bin. So it's really the yes pile or bust. And what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is how to get your CV in the yes pile. 15 seconds is the average time, in my experience, that a professional recruiter or an employer will look at a CV before making a decision. And I'll give you a real life example about an organization who were looking to recruit, I think it was an IT auditor. And I sent them somebody from their sector with over 10 years experience in IT audit. And they rejected this candidate because they didn't read the CV. And as a professional recruiter, I had to persuade them to see the candidate. And ultimately, the candidate was invited in for interview, was offered the job, but the process had taken so long that they'd actually found another job in the meantime, which shows that it's not only recruiters, but it's also employers that don't actually read a CV in the first wave at least. So DIY. I've heard some horror stories about people out there, job seekers, going to professional resume writers and letting professional resume writers write their CV for them with very little input. Now, to me, this is all about focusing on the CV as a holy grail. And actually, in my opinion, it doesn't work because nobody knows you better than yourself. And nobody knows your experience better than you. So if the resume writer forgets to ask you a certain question, doesn't really get a rapport or get to understand you, then you're reliant on a document they've produced that may not communicate you in the right way. Now, I believe anyone can write their CV, and there is a place for resume writers, but I think it's after the first draft that you've created. But I'm a firm believer that with the right education and the right understanding, you can put a CV together as good as anybody else in your field, in your profession, at your level. One of the things I have heard from job seekers over the years that sends shivers down my spine is that they tell me that they've updated their CV. So what they've done is they pulled the CV off the computer or out of the drawer, and they've added stuff on to reflect their last appointment, their last position. The problem with this is that they forget what experience they've had in the past, and they only add the new experience. And quite often there's duplication, because a job that you held today probably has some similarities perhaps with the job you held previously, and maybe the job you held prior to that. And what you're looking to do on your CV is to push your relevant experience to the top of the CV and avoid duplication. So when you write a CV, don't update. Instead, pull out your current CV, read it once, read it twice, maybe read it 3 times, then turn it over flat and write your CV from scratch. Because what you remember is probably the most important thing that should be on your CV, because what you remember is usually the stuff you're most proud of, the stuff you're most passionate about, and the stuff that you probably want to talk about in an interview. Everything else is probably not relevant. And to give you a real life example of this, I sent a candidate on interview many years ago now to a very big employer in Nottingham, and she had a number of achievements on her CV that the employer was really keen to talk about. And because she'd spent the time updating her CV and forgot to go back and actually read what was on her CV, when prompted with a question, she had no answer, even though the employer had read the achievement on the CV and wanted her to talk about it. And the feedback from the employer was, yeah, on paper a good candidate, but just couldn't communicate what we really wanted her to communicate. So writing your CV from scratch is really important. Now, writing with the reader in mind is just as important, because your CV is nothing to do with you. It's not about everything you've done in the past or want to do in the future. Getting back to the purpose of the CV, it's about getting you an invitation in for interview. So while you may position a generic CV with a recruiter, for any direct engagement with an employer, or when a recruiter is putting you forward to an employer for a particular vacancy that they're handling, best practice is to tailor your CV specifically to that vacancy. Great starting point for this is the job specification, understanding something about the business. And there are usually 4 or 5 key things that an employer or a recruiter is looking to find for an employer that you should focus on in putting your CV together. And with a specific tailored CV, what you look to do is to highlight the relevant responsibilities and the relevant achievements, more importantly, that really hone in on the key things that the employer or the recruiter representing the employer is looking for. Because in my experience, a recruiter, depending on their experience, and an employer's favorite game, again, depending on their experience, is Snap. So they have a job spec and they have a CV, and they're looking to see what fits. Particularly, this is most relevant where you have people making that initial filter that perhaps don't understand the discipline that you work in. I'm a chartered accountant, and if somebody is reading my CV to make a decision on me, back in the day when I was looking to move but didn't really understand chartered accountancy, then the chances of them selecting me ahead of somebody else with perhaps similar but not as good experience might be quite slim. So really being very focused, communicating in simple language is very, very important. So think about who's your target audience, i.e. who is going to read your CV, and then what are they actually looking for? Now, a CV is not an isolated document. So a CV doesn't just fall away once you've got a job interview. A CV is used throughout the whole of the recruitment process. And what a lot of job seekers that I've worked with over the years forget is that what's on their CV counts. And having gone through wave 1, which is the scan read, into wave 2, the yes pile, employers and recruiters will actually take the time to read the CV in more detail. And what's on the CV is really a signpost for what should be spoken about in interviews. So if you have a couple of really good achievements on your CV, then the chances are that the employer or the recruiter will ask you about those at interview. And you need to be prepared for that. And you need to make sure by putting together your specific tailored CV for a particular role that you have the best possible examples in the form of achievements to illustrate and to convey your skills and experience across an interview. And that's really important. It's often one of the things that people forget. And moving slightly into the interview space, what many job seekers do is they spend so long preparing for interview by researching the company that they forget to research themselves. And researching themselves all starts with preparing the best CV that you can. Not the perfect CV, but the best CV that you can. So what I wanted to do now is to pull up a CV template, which I put together based on my experience as to the key things that you should have on a CV and perhaps where they should be positioned. And don't worry about taking too many notes. I'll let you have the recording of this video afterwards, but I'll also send you this template as well. So I'm just going to pull the presentation down here. And what I'm going to do now is just pull up the document here. If we can. Aha, it's on the other screen. Let me drag it across for you. Okay, so this is a CV template that I put together. It's not a real CV, but what it does, it shows you some of the key things that are important to have on a CV. And if there's things missing here, don't worry, we'll probably get onto those later when we talk about some of the frequently asked questions that people generally ask me about what should and shouldn't go on a CV. Name at the top of the CV, surname underlined, contact information, email address, very important. If your CV goes forward to a recruiter, the chances are that they will take your contact information off when sending that across to an employer. But in all of your engagements with a recruiter or an employer, your contact information needs to go on there. Residence. So where you're based is quite important. So let's say you're based in Nottingham, but actually you're looking to relocate to London and you're applying for jobs in London. What I can tell you is that a recruiter in London looking at your CV and seeing Nottingham will think, why am I going to bother interviewing this candidate when I've got loads of candidates based in London with relevant experience, even if your experience is better. So if you are looking to relocate, it's best to put where you're currently based and where you would potentially relocate to, and be specific. You know, when I've talked to candidates that said I'll go anywhere, I don't tend to believe them. So usually, to convince a potential employer or recruiter that you're serious about relocating, it's usually to one place, and you might convey to them that actually you're looking at the property market, you have an offering on a house, there might be a date that you'll be available in that new city, and this is all useful stuff to put on there if you're moving location. Education, degree, master's, class of qualification. A-levels, useful to include grades. You might find that surprising, particularly if you've been working for a number of years now, but particularly some of the bigger companies place more emphasis on A-level grades than actual degree level. GCSEs or O-levels, just the number, not the grade, is usually needed. Now, if you have a professional qualification, so I'm a chartered accountant, putting down your qualification here, perhaps the institute that you're a member of, and also your past record, if good, and any awards that you received, if relevant, adds power to your CV. We live in an international world, so if you have language ability, even if it's basic, if you're on a course to learn French, Spanish, German, even at very basic level, the fact that you're doing it has value, so include it. Your LinkedIn profile. Now, you have a paper CV or an emailable CV, but actually, increasingly, both recruiters and employers are turning to LinkedIn to verify candidate skills and experience. And to some extent, LinkedIn has become an online version of your CV. So whatever you have on your CV, to some extent, needs to be mirrored on LinkedIn. And we could do another couple of webinars on LinkedIn, and if you'd like me to do that, I will do that going forwards. But making sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date and convey similar messages to your CV is very important. And don't let somebody dig around and try and find your LinkedIn profile. Give them the URL or the web link to find it. Now, there are many blogging websites out there, and if you operate in a particular space, for example, aerospace, manufacturing, retail, whatever it might be, and you have you have opinions on this stuff and you're knowledgeable about this stuff, then one of the great ways to stand out from the crowd and to highlight something on your CV that's quite unusual is to write a blog. So you go to something like Blogspot or WordPress, you create a very simple blog, and once a month you write a piece about your experiences or your understanding of a particular sector and your opinion. And actually that's very, very powerful, because people will start to find you online and they'll see that the job that you do is not something you just turn up to do 8:30 till 6 o'clock 5 days a week, but something actually that you're quite passionate about and have an opinion about. And that's very powerful. So getting into the meat of the CV, company or organization. Now, you'll know your company or organization pretty well, but perhaps the person reading your CV, particularly if it's a smaller business, probably won't. If it's a big international corporation, well, yes, they might have a perception, but even still, it may be incorrect. So a brief description of the company, what it does, sector, turnover of group and division is very important. And in my experience over the years, what employers and also recruiters look for when they're playing this game of Snap to a certain extent is to see what size of business you've worked in and what sector. So it's very important to communicate, if you're looking for a job within an SME business, that although you've worked for a really, really big company, that actually you've worked for a small division within that company, so you understand some of the issues of working in a smaller business. Job title, if you've got particular job titles that you've held, or if you're straight out of school or college or university and have work experience, well, put the job title of your work experience. Responsibilities and achievements next. So responsibilities are what you do on a day-to-day basis. So this is the stuff, if you told me that you were, a financial controller, that I would expect you to do on a day-to-day basis. It's probably what I'd expect all of the financial controllers in the marketplace to do on a day-to-day basis. Month-end accounting, management accounting, statutory reporting, managing a team. But the real supercharged stuff on a CV, which we'll come on to shortly, is your achievements, because achievements are a lot more than responsibilities. Achievements have the wow factor. And the wow factor is you communicate your achievement and people sit back or stand up and say, wow, that's really good. You really added value there. You really did something out of the ordinary, and you really made a difference to that business in your role. And the real way to supercharge your CV, whether it be through a job you've had or work experience that you've had, even for a short period of time, is to have wow achievements, supercharged achievements on your CV that are tailored specifically to the opportunity that you're looking at. Further down, we have another opportunity or another position. And I put value add here because achievements should be value add. Example 1, example 2, example 3. Down here, we live in a computer age, so there is an expectation now that you will have specific systems knowledge, particularly Microsoft Office. If you're in the design space, they will probably expect you to have some grasp of Mac. So put it down. So Microsoft Office, have you taken courses? What courses? What proficiency do you have? Don't leave people to guess. Tell them how strong and how confident you are in a particular discipline relating to computer skills. And finally, interests. So what do you do in your spare time and to what level? If you have an achievement here, it's another opportunity to tell that story, because as we'll find out shortly, achievements is really about telling a story that resonates with the reader of your CV, that gets them to buy into you and to invite you in for interview. And when I used to recruit for my own recruitment company, I always held this belief, rightly or wrongly, and that was people who didn't necessarily have a hobby outside of work or an interest outside of work, and I didn't really care what it was. I always felt that on your spare time, if you can't be passionate about something, then what are the chances of you being passionate about working in my business, doing what I ask you to do? So I believe everyone has interests. They sometimes don't believe their interests, but if they're constructed and presented in the right way, they can add real value to a CV. So, some people say, well, let's leave hobbies and interests off a CV. I say absolutely not. Hobbies and interests should absolutely go on your CV every time, and they should be communicated very much like achievements. So I'll send you this template. The thing we're going to focus on this evening to supercharge the CV is this, achievements. And I'm going to pull back the presentation now just to start to talk about that. Before I go any further, any questions as to where we've got so far? Any questions at all? Just pop the questions in if you've got them. Okay, so Peter said, how do you put an achievement together? Okay, well, we're going to come on to that very shortly. What have we got here? Okay, so Jane has said, if you are talking to a recruiter and you've sent your CV and you don't know what the job is, how do you tailor your CV to the job? Well, it's a good question. And actually, it comes a little bit to understanding your job market environment and how to talk successfully with recruiters. So knowing what to say to them and how to best position yourself with them, they will start to trust you. And even if they won't tell you where the job is today, they're going to have to tell you ahead of the interview. And at that point, saying to them, look, I'm not quite comfortable with my CV as it stands at the moment. To give myself the best chance at interview, because as I've shown you, the CV is connected to what will be asked at interview. You then have an opportunity to provide a different, more specific generic CV, specific CV rather. Okay, I promised to supercharge your CV this evening, and to do that, I wanted to talk about a supercar. Now, this is a Maserati Gran Turismo, and it is my dream car. I don't currently own one, but I will do one day. I'm determined to get there, and when I get it, I will feel pretty good driving my Maserati Gran Turismo around Nottingham. I'll feel very proud. I'll know that I've earned it. I'll want to talk to people about my car and tell them how great it is. And actually, it's exactly the same when you talk about your achievements. So they should be something you're very proud of. They should be something that you feel good talking about. And they should be something that you've taken a little bit of time to earn. You've done a project, or you've achieved something that wasn't that easy, but you got there. So all in all, creating achievements on a CV is a little bit about the same mentality as working towards something that you really, really value. And if you value your achievements and can communicate your achievements at interview in the right way and on your CV to get the interview, then people will buy into that, and you'll start to get more invitations to interview ahead of your competitors, other job seekers in the job market. So let's talk about cars. So cars, or car, stands for three things: context, action, and result. So context is the situation that you found yourself in. Action is the thing that you did, not we did, but you did specifically, even if you were part of a team. And result is a quantifiable result that over the period that you ran this particular project or did this particular thing, this was the quantifiable result at the end of it. So any good achievement on a CV has a context, action, and result. And as you'll see, this can really propel your achievements on your CV into outer space. They get noticed, they make a loud noise, and people will start to take note of them. Now, many job seekers that I've worked with over the years tend to focus too much on the context and tend to focus too much on the action, and they forget the punchline. It's a bit like watching a film and the film ends too quickly and you're not quite sure what happened, or you think something else should have happened. Stopped it too early. So the result is something quantifiable that really demonstrates to the reader of that achievement that, yes, wow, you did something pretty special on this occasion. It's a little bit like storytelling. And this might sound slightly silly, but actually it's very, very true. And I run a number of different businesses. And actually, if I want to get people's attention, I usually tell them a story. I'm presenting tomorrow at a big conference in Nottingham on the local economy. And the thing I want to do is to start to tell a story, because when we were kids, our parents used to tell us stories. You know, it's what we get before we went to bed. It's what we get to calm us down. And we all love a good story. That's why the TV and the media industry is so successful. So it's no different, actually, when you construct your CV and construct achievements on your CV. And any good story has a start, which is the context, a middle, which is the action, it's what you did, and an end, which is the quantifiable result. So when you think about your CVs, if you want to think about supercars, you don't want to think about context, action, result, just think about a good story and think, does my achievement tell a good story? And if it doesn't, the chances are it's probably a responsibility. So you have the opportunity, and depending on who's on the call this evening, some of you will be more experienced, had a number of jobs. Some of you might be straight out of school or college. There are two types of achievement that you can put on your CV. There's those that you find inside work, that you've gained in work, and there's those that you find outside work from your hobbies and interests, which I'll come on to shortly. Now, I'm going to give you a real-life example of an achievement specific to me, specifically thinking about my Career Codex business. And here it is. So this might go on my CV if I were looking for a job in the careers guidance, careers education space. So here we go. To help job seekers better understand the job market, wrote a book called Super Secrets of the Successful Job Seeker in 6 months. That's my context. Yeah, that's the starting point of my story. Published by Harriman House in 2013, over 1,000 copies have been sold in the first 12 months. And actually the first sentence is a little bit more than the context, because there's some action in there, because it's telling the reader how long it took me to write the book and that I wrote a book. Published by Harriman House in 2013, over 1,000 copies have been sold in the first 12 months. So here we're still a little bit in the action phase, but now we're into the results phase. 1,000 copies sold. And the book, this is the real punchline, has also received 49 5-star ratings on Amazon. That's the real wow factor, because what that conveys to the reader of this achievement on my CV is that actually he wrote this book, he did it in 6 months, it's been published, it's sold over 1,000 copies in 12 months, and 49 people at least have read it and taken the time to review it on Amazon. So that achievement, if you don't mind me saying so myself, has some wow factor if I was looking for a job in the careers and education space. Outside of work, it's a similar story. And for those of you that don't have, not held down a job because you're out of school, college, or university, you will have all done stuff outside of school or university or college that has value and shows that you can turn up, you can stick at stuff, you can achieve something, you've stuck to a goal or whatever it might be. And outside of work, I have a achievement as well that I usually put on my CV. Now, I'm not looking for a job, but I would be putting it on my CV if I was looking for a job. And one of the reasons I put it on my CV is because A, it would probably get me an invite to interview because it's slightly unusual. And secondly, it's something that I absolutely would want to talk about at interview. So here we go. In 2006, while living in Japan and looking for a new challenge, I enrolled on the International Aikido Sensei program. So that's the context. I was in Japan, I was looking for something to do, and I decided I would study a martial art. This is an 11-month intensive martial arts boot camp with the Tokyo Riot Police. So that was the action I took. I did it for 11 months. It was intensive, and I did it with the Tokyo Riot Police. And the result, the quantifiable results, and you'll notice when a result is quantifiable, there are usually numbers present, which helps your CV stand out further. I am one of only circa 150 people in the world to have survived and successfully completed this course. Again, something outside of work, second achievement on my CV that might just catch somebody's eye for them to say, wow, irrespective of whatever else is on the CV, this is of interest. This guy's done something slightly different. He's achieved something that was tough to achieve. It took him some time. It took some effort. This guy's worth meeting. And that's all you need. You don't need to tell everyone on your CV everything that you've done. All you need to do is to spark enough interest to get invited in for interview. Now, there is a further way to supercharge a achievement. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that using bold text on your achievements is a very, very powerful tool to get those achievements noticed. Because, as I said at the start, the average employer or recruiter will spend 15 seconds reading a CV. So if you highlight keywords like Japan, martial arts boot camp, one of only 150 people in the world to have survived, and people catch on to that as they scan read, well, guess what? They're probably going to stop and take note. And that's all you need. It's a bit like somebody reads your CV in a real hurry, and your job at every opportunity is to put the brakes on so that they stop and take note. And through supercharged CVs and through supercharged CVs bolded out with relevant wording that may captivate some interest, you have a real chance to get people to stop and take note. So how many achievements to have on a CV? Well, it really depends. I would say at least 2, and certainly no more than 3, because if you have too many, then you can't see the wood from the trees. And actually, if you have too many, my question would be, how specific are you being in addressing the needs and the requirements of the reader of your CV? So pick the best 2 or 3. If you have 4 or 5, there's probably 2 weaker ones there that need to go. So, frequently asked questions, and you may have some questions to ask me at the end of the presentation, but let's talk about frequently asked questions. And these are things when I go and present on careers education and employability, I get asked all the time. So people say, well, how long should my CV be? Well, the answer to that, it's not really an answer at all. Your CV should be as long as it needs to be. No more, no less. But every sentence on your CV should fight for the right to be there. And if it doesn't add value, you should take it out. And actually, one of the real skills in putting a CV together is not adding stuff, not creating the content, but having created something, it's then stripping out what's not the power stuff, what really disguises the stuff that you're really proud of, your real skills and experience, and being disciplined enough to rip it out. That's one of the key skills that people often overlook when they put their CV together. Second question I get asked is, should I include a cover letter? Now, it depends. Recruiters normally don't ask for a cover letter. If they're working on a retained assignment where they work exclusively for a particular client, they may do. Certainly, if you're asked for one, you must include one. And how to put a cover letter together is a topic for another webinar, because putting a cover letter together, it's not a repetition of your CV, because all that does, it gives the reader of your CV and cover letter twice as much to read, and actually they don't want to read it. So, if you'd like me to, let me know. I can put together a webinar on how to put together a cover letter going forwards. But there are some real unique skills and techniques that you would use to put together a cover letter, which is a very brief document. But if you're asked for one, you've got to put one there, because if not, it's simply failing to follow instructions. Personal summary. So this is the bit at the top of a CV that says, I am a conscientious and capable individual with excellent communication skills. Now, the thing is, most of your competition are putting something similar on their CV to communicate what they feel about themselves. And in actual fact, it's fairly bland. It doesn't really add any value, and it's not really verifiable or quantifiable. It doesn't really tell me anything about your skills and experience. And actually, in my personal opinion, it distracts from the real value in any CV, which, as I've explained already, is achievement. So, there is an argument, as there is with website pages, that the most important content should sit at the top. So if you've got this personal statement that is fairly bland and nondescript, that pushes your real experience and achievements down, then I would question why you have it. And I would actually say be disciplined, and go back and actually take it out. If it doesn't add value, take it out and actually get rid of it and put in a more powerful achievement to really supercharge your CV. One of the questions I get asked is, should I include a photo? Well, my view is that how you look generally doesn't impact on your ability to do a job. That's not unless you're in the modeling industry. So generally the answer would be no, but I just wanted to caveat that by saying that it's a very different story on LinkedIn, which in very simple terms is an online version of your CV. Now, on LinkedIn, if you don't have a photo, the chances of people stopping on your online CV becomes slimmer, because there is an expectation on LinkedIn, due to the medium of exchange that it is, that you will have a photo. And that's really set by precedent that most other people on LinkedIn who are active in the job market on there do have a photo. But certainly for your paper documents, unless you're in the modeling industry, then absolutely not. And finally, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things you can do different to utilize your CV to have a really, really positive impact and to change some of your fortunes in the job market. And I've alluded to one of these things already, which is social media. So if you have a paper CV that, yes, you have on job boards, you have with recruiters, you might be talking directly to some employers, well, that's great. That's great. And the chances are, yes, you might find a job. But what about passive traffic that's looking for people with your skills and experience online each and every day? And what I mean by that is that recruiters and employers now are using social media to go direct to market to find not only active job seekers, i.e. people who are actively looking for a job in the job market, but also what we call in the recruitment trade as passive job seekers. These are people with the right skills and experience who aren't necessarily looking, but will be interested to find out more if an opportunity presented itself. And I think the opening line for my chapter on this in my book, Super Secrets of the Successful Job Seeker, is that if you don't exist in cyberspace, you don't exist at all. And ask if you've got kids, ask a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old. If you're not on Facebook or you're not on LinkedIn or you're not on something else, then you don't exist at all. Now, we don't have enough time to talk about social media and which platform should be right, which platform should perhaps not be so relevant for your job search. But that's a topic for another webinar going forwards. But what I would say is that if you do nothing else, creating an online profile on LinkedIn using elements of your CV, your key achievements, would be best practice. I put phone call down because in my experience, many job seekers will send their CV off to a company or a recruiter, and then they'll sit and wait, and they wait for the phone to ring. In actual fact, the phone might not ring, because if your CV has perhaps landed on the maybe pile, then unless you do something to prompt that CV jumping from the maybe pile to the yes pile, then in actual fact, you probably won't get invited in for interview. And I'll use a real life example for this. In my recruitment company, I was looking to hire a graduate, and I interviewed 10, 12 graduates, none of which were right, mainly because they didn't turn up with the right employability skills. And I'd almost given up hiring, and I'd taken the advert down, etc., etc., etc. And then I had a phone call in my recruitment company one day from a young chap called Matt, who said to me, I'm just phoning up, just wanted to confirm that you'd received my CV. And I said, well, not sure I have. He said, well, go into your inbox. I sent it at this date, at this time. And I went in, I opened up the CV. And because he prompted me and directed me to go into my maybe pile, and actually it wasn't even my maybe pile because I hadn't seen it because I got so many CVs, I opened it up and we had a chat on the telephone. And I was impressed with some of his experience. I was also impressed with how he came over on the phone. And as a result of that, I invited him in for interview and I hired him. So, don't be afraid in this day and age of technology to get on the phone and to follow stuff up. You follow up to confirm your CV's arrived, to see if there are any questions or comments or feedback, and that's it. If it's a no, it's a no. If it's a yes, you have the opportunity to have some dialogue and to warm up for a potential interview. Post. Useful technique to get some attention and to do things slightly different from other job seekers, which is one of the key elements of the Career Codex methodology. So if everyone is sending their CV via email, and we all know how easy email is to delete, why not send your CV by post? And why not send it registered or recorded delivery by post so the recipient has to sign for it? In doing that, you're showing that you're placing real value on your CV, and the person receiving it will naturally have some of that value conveyed onto them. And one of the techniques that you can use is you can handwrite an envelope. So if you think about when you come home from work or school, college, university, whatever, and you have a pile of post, you have stuff that's handwritten in the window envelopes. You have stuff that's typed in the window envelopes. And you think, well, it's a bill. Not too excited about that. But if ever you receive something with a handwritten envelope, what do? We open it first because it's the exciting stuff. And even if we open it last, because we like to save the best till last, there's an air of anticipation and excitement when we open this stuff. And you talk to any professional marketer, and they still use these techniques today. I had something come through my post, through my door the other day, which used exactly this same technique. And I understand this stuff, but I was still suckered in, and I still opened it, and I still read it all because I was so intrigued why someone would take that time and effort to send me something through the post. And finally, what I call race to face. And again, this is last chapter of my book. I talk about this. So there is a way that you can go from CV to first interview in one hit, but it requires some bravery and it requires some belief, a different way of thinking, which ultimately leads to a different way of acting. And if there are particular businesses that you're interested in working for, or recruiters that you want to go and engage, you put on a suit, you dress smartly, comb your hair, print off a copy of your CV, you put it in an envelope, and you turn up at their office. And you speak to the receptionist and you say something on the lines of, I was in the area, I understand there is a vacancy here, or I'd be really keen to speak to XYZ individual about a potential opportunity. I brought my CV, I'd like to hand it across to you in person, if that's okay. And while I'm here, would it be possible to have a couple of minutes with with the individual that you wanted to meet? Now, we're jumping from CV to interview in one fell swoop, and actually we're into education that I provide on how to run a successful interview. But thinking about this, even if the receptionist says, well, XYZ isn't available, guess what will happen? When you leave and XYZ, Mr. or Mrs. XYZ turns up or comes back to the office, the receptionist will go and hand this CV in the envelope across to this person, and they'll say, this lady or this guy turned up, they were dressed in a smart suit, they were really well presented, they were very polite and courteous, and they asked me to hand this on to you in person. And there'll be a conversation starts, because if it were me, I would ask the receptionist, well, what was this person like? I'd be intrigued, and actually if the CV was, okay, it doesn't have to be fantastic, but if it was okay, I would probably pick up the phone to that person and get them into interview, because I'd have a bit more comfort as to how they presented themselves in person. So we've almost reached the end of the presentation today, and I hope that's been really, really useful for you. My role really is to get you to think slightly different about a CV, and to supercharge your CV through achievements and through some of the other things that I've got across on the webinar this evening. If you'd like to keep in touch so you get to know about webinars and other content that I produce ahead of anyone on social media or anywhere else, if you go to my website, careercodex.co.uk, on any of the pages, if you drop down to the bottom, you can sign up for my newsletter. I don't spam people. I send this out every 2 weeks with useful content. You can unsubscribe at any time. And as a thank you for subscribing, I will send you a free copy of 5 things successful job seekers know that others don't. The other useful way to keep in touch is to follow me on Twitter. Most of the stuff that I'm doing goes out on Twitter. And again, it's a useful way to find out as to some of the free events that I'm running. So we're about 5 to the hour. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure to be on the line to you this evening. I've got a few minutes if anyone has any questions. If you've got some questions, I'll just give you 10-20 seconds just to type something in the box, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, we've got some questions coming through. Okay, so John said, you mentioned at the start that your CV doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, that's right, John. And the reason I said that is because in my experience talking to candidates over the years, and people phoning me up saying I've got a new version of the CV, a new version of the CV, a new version of the CV. In actual fact, it's totally irrelevant because as a recruiter, I rarely read a CV from start to finish. Only if I was putting that candidate through to the employer, at that point would I probably read the CV, because I would expect the employer to ask me some questions. So yes, it doesn't have to be perfect, but what it does have to do is to spark interest, and that's the distinction. So it doesn't need to be a perfect CV that answers all the questions that an employer or recruiter may have. That's what a face-to-face interview is about. It needs to be good enough and have enough wow factor in terms of its achievements that the person reading the CV thinks, do you know what? That person is somebody I absolutely have to interview. That's what it's all about. Okay, I've got another question here. Okay, so Graham has said, I've seen advice stating name in the header and contact info in the footer. Any thoughts on that? Graham, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. What you don't want to do is to hide your contact information, because nothing will frustrate a recruiter or an employer more than finding a great CV and then not being able to find the contact details. So I would probably push that stuff towards the top of the CV. So maybe in the header, then it's really easy for somebody to find that. You won't believe this. You may believe it. It's a true story. I have had people go to the trouble of applying for jobs that I was recruiting in the past, and they'd send me a really good CV, and I was desperate to talk to them, but they failed to include their contact details, and it was just such a missed opportunity. So wherever they're visible, and give me a few options, home phone number, mobile number, and email address are good. I always tended to call the mobile number because as a recruiter, you're always worried about calling somebody in at the wrong time, perhaps in a place of work or whatever else. If the mobile number is the one you call, that it's going to go usually direct to the person, or you have an opportunity to leave a voicemail. And just related to your question, Graham, one of the reasons on LinkedIn that we talk about this thing called a professional headline, and that I always encourage people to include in a professional headline their contact details, is because people don't want to go searching around on LinkedIn to find your contact details if they're interested in speaking with you. And if you take a look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that in my professional headline, that I have my contact details there. And actually, anyone on the call this evening, if you would like to connect up on LinkedIn, if you search Simon Gray and Career Codex, you will find me on LinkedIn. I'll be very, very happy to connect. Okay, Graham, got another question from you. Okay, so you've put observation, 2 to 3 achievements seems low, but does make them good. I don't seem to be able to see the end of your question. Can you just type the end of your question in a new chat box? I get the first bit, 2 to 3 achievements seems low. It depends. Good and specific. Is it common? Okay. So here's my thoughts. If you've had one job, then you might put 4 achievements, but generally 2 or 3 is best advice. If you've had a number of different jobs and you've got 2 achievements per position that you've held, well, pretty quickly your CV can start to have some weight behind it. The thinking that you have there, I think, is that actually more is better, but actually less is often more on a CV. So going back to what I said earlier, you want to be able to see the wood from the trees, and it's not communicating everything that you've done or everything that you're proud of. What it is communicating the most relevant stuff to the reader of your CV that gives them a wow factor. So think of yourself as a fisherman, and you're on the edge of the river. You're trying to catch the prize fish. What you do is you invest the time to research the right bait, you put the right bait on the end of the line, you cast your net in the water, and you've got the best chance of getting the fish on the end of the line that you want. If you put everything on the end of the line, well, it's probably a little bit too much, and actually the fish might just swim past. So I understand why you've asked the question, but actually being specific and making your CV, making your achievements have the wow factor on your CV, and adopting the mentality of less is more actually will add more weight. Okay, we're about on the hour. You have my email address there. If there are any burning questions after today that you would like to ask me about, please drop me a line. Thank you ever so much for joining me this evening. I will send out a quick email probably tomorrow now once I've uploaded the video, and I'll let you have a copy of that to watch again if you'd like to do so. If you have contacts, friends, or anyone else that would be interested in the kind of education that I'm putting out there, if you direct them to my website and to the newsletter sign up that I've mentioned, I'd be more than happy to communicate with them as well. So I wish you all a pleasant evening. You now know how to supercharge your CV, and all the very best for the future. Thank you and good night.